Welcome to part 2 of Mental Meanderings of an Aging Christian on the theme of who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going. The next slide provides references to material that will further summarize the presentations of part 1. Following the presentation of these references, we will proceed with the content of part 2. Part 1 of this work provided an attempt to examine exponential growth that has taken place in the world, particularly in the last 100 to 150 years. As an adjunct to this, and perhaps to assist in evolving one's awareness and understanding of the rapidity of change in the world, the reference provided on this slide can be very helpful. Dr. Hans Rosling is an epidemiologist from Sweden who has a website entitled gapminder.org and has recently published a book entitled Factfulness. Dr. Rosling's fundamental thesis is that the average person in today's world is perhaps 30 to 50 years behind the times in their view and understanding of the nature of development and change and rapidity of change in the world. His website and the Factfulness book are devoted to trying to help people move forward in their view and understanding of the world and to come closer to seeing the world as a total place of radical and rapidly moving change. The work is very helpful to understanding this change. Part 2 examines human origins, where we come from, who and what we are. This will be done in the context of the shifting paradigms of science and the developments that are rapidly taking place and continuing in human knowledge. In particular, these advancements have presented serious challenges and problems in the reconciliation of the traditional human stories and in the expressions and understandings of our current religious faiths. In so doing, we are examining humans in today's rapidly evolving universe. Very often within these presentations, no comment will be made with regard to the challenges to the human stories or to the faith problems, the religious faith problems presented. These, in many instances, will be left to the conclusion of the observer. Over the past several years, a decade of the writings and thought of Dr. Elia Delio have proven helpful in addressing the who and where we're coming from and going to questions that preoccupy my faith and reason throughout most of my life. Many of the slides that follow in part 2 had their origins in a YouTube production of a spring 2017 presentation at St. Mary's University, a partner university to Notre Dame in the United States. The lecture is entitled a hunger for wholeness. It is the basis for a book that she later published in the spring of 2018, and one of a succession of books that date back over the decade. While I used many of the slides from that presentation, in the end I modified many of them and went to the internet sources for graphic images on themes she was discussing. It is important to acknowledge the work of Dr. Dillio and the influence her writings have had on the evolution of my faith in the never-ending pursuit of these questions and their consequences. Three questions have formed the core of this project. The who are we, where do we come from, and where are we going questions. To this point, we have not answered or attempted to answer the who are we question. It seems appropriate at this point to attempt an answer to the who are we question, being very aware that humans throughout history have their stories, their myths, their declarations about who we are. And so I have presented 2 or 3 statements that are commitments to the who are we question. First of all, we are known as Homo sapiens, the scientific name for the human species. Homo is the human genus, which also includes Neanderthals and many other extinct species of the broader term hominoid. Homo sapiens is the only surviving species of the genus Homo. Modern humans are sometimes called anatomically modern humans. Secondly, there are distinguishing characteristics of being human that are viewed as most central to this presentation. Physically, being human is defined by the genetic code as expressed in its DNA. While many characteristics are shared with other forms of life, particularly animals, the capacities of intellect, the faculty of reasoning and understanding objectively, of knowing, are especially with regard to abstract and academic matters, and free will, the ability to choose, think, and act voluntarily, the capacity to love. These are the central and most essential characteristics of being human that are seen as background to this document. In addressing the question, where do we come from, we will present a rather disjointed description of our origins. It will begin near the current era, and from there go to the beginning and return to the present. In so doing, it is hoped that we will demonstrate some of the changes that have taken place from our stories and from our religious faith as to where we come from, and the process whereby we got to the present with hopefully some indications of where we may be going in the future. Since major elements of this presentation and these presentations concern the major shifts that have taken place in the human stories, it seems important to visit particularly the Judeo-Christian story of where we come from. I do this from a personal perspective. As a child in the mid 1950s and 40s, the creation story as found in the first book of the Bible represented the basic grassroots Christian position on human origins and consequently who we were. These traditional interpretations of the creation story as found in the first book of the Bible affected, for example, our understandings of time and the methods of creation, worldviews as to the nature of the universe. Humans were seen as fallen creatures, the result of original sin, and in fact the basis for the theology of sin in humanity. Humans were seen as expelled from paradise and thus needing to be saved or redeemed. Additionally, the first book of the Bible provided the Judeo-Christian underpinnings of the patriarchal paradigm. It is interesting that I speak of the 1940s and 50s as the period that formed my understanding and my worldview and my awareness of the Judeo-Christian story. In fact, this story had been under serious challenge for over 400 years. The slides that follow will examine this 400-year period history and what or where it has led. Part 1 concluded with a series of 4 major disruptions that are strongly influencing change in the world in which we live. We now shift to examine a series of discontinuities that underpin and are perhaps the scientific and theoretical foundations for the disruptions that are taking place. Four discontinuities are presented as examples of the evolution of human knowledge, an evolution that has revolutionized the world views and challenged the traditional stories, the religious faiths of people throughout the planet. The four are the life works of Copernicus, Darwin, Einstein, and Turing. The work of each of these will be briefly acknowledged in the slides that follow. Next slide. The concept of discontinuity has specific technical applications and meanings in the sciences of mathematics and geology. In more general applications, authors describe various major breakthroughs as discontinuous events. The Business Dictionary definition provides meanings that are closer to the use of the concept in this context. Unpredictable, unforeseen, natural, or man-made sudden change. Consequence, event, or force that confounds or disrupts earlier expectations or estimates. Occurrence of a massive natural disaster, discovery that the Earth revolves around the Sun, and not the other way around, invention of the personal computer, and the advent of the Internet and World Wide Web are some of the examples of discontinuity. One might also see the concept of paradigm shift. The four discontinuities include: the first, the formulations of Copernicus, later confirmed and elaborated by Kepler, Galileo, and Newton, revolutionized the science of astronomy from the Earth being the center of the universe, ultimately, to the universe of today with its millions, perhaps billions, of galaxies and ever-expanding light-year measured immensity. The second, the work of Charles Darwin, as documented in The Origin of Species, and the subsequent elaborations in a wide variety of sciences, among them cosmology, the origins and unfolding of the universe, chemistry, biology, geology, etc., etc. This slide contains reference to several key concepts that will flow through the remainder of this presentation. The third discontinuity is referred to as the work of Albert Einstein that has led through the past century to paradigm-shifting developments in the science of physics, and in particular, quantum physics. The extent of these knowledge development processes continues to have pronounced outcomes in our understandings of research methodologies, quantitative and qualitative, human consciousness, neurology, and the essential unity of mind-matter at the foundations of reality. The fourth discontinuity, the work of Alan Turing, is viewed as a lead in this discontinuity. The Encyclopedia Britannica states, "He is a British mathematician and logician who made major contributions to mathematics, cryptanalysis, logic, philosophy, and mathematical biology, and also to the new areas later named computer science, cognitive science, artificial intelligence, and artificial life." An additional reference is found in the work of Bruce Malish, an American historian, professor, Department of History at MIT. He authored the fourth discontinuity, the co-evolution of humans and machines, in 1995. In it, he identified three previous mental barriers or discontinuities that the human race has had to overcome. The first two are the same as stated above. He attributed the third discontinuity not to Einstein but to Sigmund Freud. He states Copernicus helped dispel the myth that humanity is at the center of the universe. Darwin demonstrated how there is no brick wall divide between ourselves and the animal kingdom, and Freud linked our conscious to our subconscious selves. It is similarly mentally uncomfortable for many people now to accept the crossing of the fourth discontinuity with no absolute divide now existing between ourselves and artificial technology. This is not to suggest that human beings are the same as machines, but rather that there is increasingly a continuous spectrum between the two with no strict binary divide. Maslish's proposition that we are now crossing the fourth discontinuity is presented in two parts. First, he states that it is no longer realistic to think of humans without machines. Secondly, he suggests that the same paradigms or concepts now explain the very workings of both human beings and many artificial mechanisms. Next slide. The futurist Charles Barnett states, with the development of artificial intelligence, organic biocomputers, genetic engineering, and nanotechnology, and xenotransplantation, not to mention progress in life extension, and the advocation of transhumanism, both of these propositions also seem at least reasonable, if not as uncomfortable as they did when Malish published his book back in 1993. How human civilization will cope with the crossing of the fourth discontinuity may well be a matter of considerable technological, cultural, and ethical debate. Next slide. Having discussed briefly the discontinuities of the last 400 years, the major shifts in our scientific knowledge and understanding, it is important to focus directly on cosmology and anthropology, on our worldviews and where we come from. To do this, the following slides will present a series of basic working definitions before we transition into consideration of primary focuses on cosmology and anthropology. Next slide. As will be seen in later slides, the stuff of creation contained within it the seeds of consciousness and awareness that manifested itself in the evolutionary processes to the point where human knowledge and the ability to act upon it, the universe knowing itself and acting upon itself, constitute, in my opinion, the greatest gifts that we as humans possess. The abilities to know and to learn and to find truth in the universe rely upon the various sciences that we have evolved. There follows in the following slides a series of definitions that proceed from how we know to how we think and to definitions of some basic scientific disciplines. The definition of epistemology is the study of knowledge and justified belief. As the study of knowledge, epistemology is concerned with the following questions. What are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge? What are its sources? What is its structure? And what are its limits? As the study of justified belief, epistemology aims to answer questions such as how we are to understand the concept of justification. What makes justified beliefs justified? Is justification internal or external to one's mind? Understood more broadly, epistemology is about issues having to do with the creation and dissemination of knowledge in particular areas of inquiry. Next, we have a definition of logic, the science that investigates the principles governing correct and reliable inference, a particular method of reasoning or argumentation, the system or principles of reasoning applicable to any branch of knowledge or study. Science may be defined as a branch of knowledge or study dealing with a body of facts or truth, systematically arranged and showing the operation of general laws. For example, the mathematical sciences. Systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. Any of the branches of natural or physical science. Metaphysics may be defined as the branch of philosophy that treats of first principles, including ontology and cosmology, and is intimately connected with epistemology. 2 slides ago, the phrase, "Tell me your cosmology and I will tell you your anthropology," was presented. Here are the definitions of cosmology and anthropology. Cosmology is the branch of philosophy dealing with the origin and general structure of the universe, with its parts, elements, and laws, and especially with such of its characteristics as space, time, causality, and freedom. The branch of astronomy that deals with the general structure and evolution of the universe. Anthropology, the science that deals with the origins, physical and cultural development, biological characteristics, and social customs and beliefs of humankind. The study of human beings, similarity to and divergence from other animals. This slide and the slides that follow to the end of this part depict the biblical world and the worldview that changed with the findings of Copernicus and the movement into the conception of the universe is composed of multiple galaxies. Also, these slides will demonstrate the movement of thought over the last 300 years until the last century. It is the last century that becomes profound in its paradigm shifts from these ways of thinking. It should be noted that for most Christians, grassroots Christianity, the basic concept of the universe and the faith that is based upon those concepts still rests with this biblical notion of the universe. The discontinuity between that faith and our knowledge advancement in the last 400 years is really what this presentation is all about. With the rise of modern science, we have begun the processes of exploring, perhaps even conquering, space. The use of manned space travel, unmanned space vehicles, satellites, and our ability to peer into the universe through telescopetry and radio waves means that God has been pushed out of the cosmos. The boundaries of the cosmos no longer seem existent. And to this end, God's place in the universe, as depicted in biblical images of creation, is now gone. This slide recognizes the contribution of René Descartes to modern philosophy, and particularly the mind-body distinction and separation that was common through Christianity and the Judeo-Christian world, and particularly the philosophers of Greece and the Western Europe through the medieval period. The mechanical philosophy of Descartes paved the way for the natural sciences to proceed with what could be quantified and measured, and this, in combination with the developers of the scientific methodology, formed the basis of modern science as we know it. This led to what is frequently referred to as the clockwork universe. The 17th century space was quantifiable, leaving no room for any other kind of space to exist. Mind was certainly separate from matter, and the extension of space into the sphere of infinity gave rise to a bold, new mechanistic philosophy that saw the world as a vast machine and saw God as the watchmaker who simply creates the vast machine and allows it to run. The words of Pierre Teilhard de Chardin in the first half of the last century might provide a good summary of Part 2A of these presentations. He stated, "The artificial separation between humans and cosmos is at the root of our contemporary moral confusion." To this, one might add that the separation of mind and body, the artificial separation of body and soul, lies at the root of our contemporary moral and religious faith confusion, as expressed in our inabilities to reconcile traditional faith dogmas with the findings of modern science. This is the end of Part 2A.